What's up, everyone? Welcome to another episode of the Terminator Training Show. I'm Kevin Smith. This is going to be a different style of Q&A. I have done this with a couple of guests in the past, Dr. David Walton, aka TF Voodoo, as well as John Hamilton. We went through my more in-depth questions, which can be found, by the way, in my Instagram bio on a Google form. Basically, there's no character limit like there is on Instagram. So these questions can be a little bit more in-depth and with some more context, and therefore, usually the answers are going to be a little bit more in-depth. Obviously, you guys ask great questions on Instagram, but there's a character limit. So once in a while, I am going to go through, like I did with those two guests, and answer some of these more in-depth questions on my own. I have quite a few written down. I'm not sure how many I'm going to get to. I don't think any of them are crazy long. Like I would expect to get through 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 of them, but we will see how that goes. And yeah, so I'm going to do this periodically. If you want to ask a more in-depth question, you definitely can check that out. I'm also going to start posting this in my show notes for anyone who does not have Instagram. By the way, if you don't follow me on Instagram, Terminator_training. But if you don't, you can check the show notes and you will be able to find this same sheet. Now, for whatever reason, and this could be a mistake on my part, I am struggling to get to where I can actually look at the form of the questions in order. They're pretty much just random questions in a random order. Of course, I could be just not savvy enough to use the Google Forms properly enough to actually see them in order, but I am just kind of going to go through and select some ones that are not too long. Candidly, there are some in there that are good questions. They're just super long. It would take me 3, 4, 5 minutes just to read the question, and I would have to go over it with more of a fine-tooth comb, and it would not be as appropriate for a podcast Q&A. I appreciate the depth, but of course, there's a little bit of a limit to it. So try and get it to where you can ask your question in, say, 3 to 4 sentences max, not a full thesis paragraph. That would be appreciated, and it'll allow me to actually get through them here on the podcast and hopefully give you guys some good answers, and you can implement those into your life to get better. So that's really the goal with the entire show, but that's what we're going to do. It's a little bit of a strange thing for me right now. It is 5:55 a.m. in the morning. I usually don't do my podcast first thing, but I got done with a few of the things that I needed to get done today. So I figured I would hop on and do a podcast and then go to the gym afterwards. So that's what we're going to do today. And without further ado, let's hop into the first question. I'm an 18 X-ray that will ship out in early 2025 and will likely attend SFAS during the winter. I'll obviously spend a lot of time being cold, but I'm wondering if there are any positives that come with SFAS in the winter that other classes wouldn't receive. So essentially comparing winter selection class to a non-winter, or for now it would be a spring or a fall class because they eliminated the August class, which is probably a good thing for most people. Pretty brutal. And I'm going to kind of talk about why going in warmer weather may not be as optimal as going in colder weather here in a second. I will say that as I sit here right now, it is 11 degrees out in North Carolina. I live 25 minutes or so from Camp McCall, and I know the guys are out at the guys in the current class are out at land nav right now, which means they're sleeping outside and doing their land nav training, and they should be starting the STAR course pretty soon, if not right now. So that would be pretty rough. It's definitely not usually in the single digits or the low teens in North Carolina. You may see that a couple times every winter, but this winter, although it kind of started a little bit late, it didn't start getting really cold until probably mid-December, give or take. It was actually pretty mild before then, and I thought it was going to be a very mild winter. Since then, it has been very cold, and that can be pretty rough. So the main downsides, honestly, like the biggest downside of going in the winter, and really one of the only ones, is the times of day where you're not really doing anything, aka you are just waking up in the morning getting ready for the day, or you just finished the day's events where you're going to be moving around, usually with a ruck on. So you're going to be pretty warm during those times anyway, but you just finished, you're kind of dialing it back for the day, getting ready to go to sleep. And then of course, sleeping. Yes, you have sleeping bags, and they absolutely do allow for fires, which also means fire guard shifts, but it's still pretty tough. Like, it's not fun to be freezing, especially when your hands are freezing. Maybe your feet are freezing. maybe your whole body's freezing, you definitely do get to wear snivel. Snivel gear, for those not familiar with the lingo, is the Army's word for gear that is not part of the regular uniform, but you can add it when it's cold to kind of keep you warm. The Army snivel gear is not super optimal, what I would consider super optimal, but it's solid enough to keep you warm. So that is the biggest downside. However, there are a couple upsides that are pretty significant. And I personally went to selection in February of 2012, and it was not quite as cold as it currently is right now, but we had some cold days. But with that comes enhanced performance. So if you're going to throw a ruck on and go as fast as you can for, say, 10 miles, 12 miles, whatever it is, and you have the opportunity to choose between, I want to do this in 35 to 45 degree weather versus 85 to 95 degree weather with high humidity or high dew point, I would choose option A any day of the week. Not just for safety reasons, like you're less likely to become a heat casualty or get a heat injury, but also for performance reasons. Nice, cool weather is very much more optimal for performance than hot, humid weather. So you are definitely going to be able to display your fitness a lot better in the wintertime than in the summertime. It is relative. So, if you are going to finish in the top 10% in the winter versus the top 10% in the summer, I guess we're talking gate week here, you're probably going to be in the top 10% either way, assuming you have acclimated to the heat and whatnot going in the summertime or going in the warmer parts of the year. September class, maybe May class. May class this year was much like a summer class. I think it was even hotter than the August class. You're still going to perform well compared to the other guys. And you're still going to perform well in a winter class when it's cooler compared to the other guys. However, your times are just not going to be as dominant or as fast as they would be when it's cold out. That's just how it is. Most, if not all-time endurance records have been set in cooler, more comfortable weather. Usually most data shows that 40 to 50 degrees weather is usually the ideal weather for endurance performance, just because your body does not have to work extra hard to keep itself cool. So that would be one advantage. Another big advantage of going in the winter or even in the springtime, especially early spring, March, April timeframe, is the lack of vegetation. The vegetation in the woods of Hoffman, which is where you do land nav, this is primarily a land nav advantage, which coincidentally is the part of the course that drops the most people historically per class. So you really want to take this pretty seriously. But the vegetation isn't terrible in most parts of Hoffman, even in the summertime, but around draws in the low ground, it's a lot worse in the summertime than it is in the wintertime. And in general, it's a lot more sparse in the winter. So you can see further, but not only that, you can also walk and move easier without getting hung up on briars and thorns and other vegetation. So freedom of movement is a little bit higher in the wintertime. And also you're going to be able to see your points from further away. You're going to be able to just see, your visibility is going to be enhanced in the wintertime. So, maybe in the summer, say for example, you have to be, for most points, you have to be 300 to 400 meters away from that point to actually see it. Say at nighttime when it's got chem lights and maybe the point sitter has a fire going on. In the wintertime, you could probably see that from 500 meters, 600 meters, 700 meters. And with land nav, every meter counts. So you definitely want to be able to see things from further away. It definitely helps. You don't have to be quite as accurate. You can be in that general vicinity, do a little scan, and maybe see a chem light. That's a lot you wouldn't be able to see in the summertime, but because there's just a lot less vegetation, less leaves on the trees, so on and so forth, you'll be able to see it. So if you can handle, which hopefully you can, if you're going to be a Green Beret someday, you probably want to be able to handle being cold a couple of parts of the day, especially if the trade-off is enhanced performance, less likely to go down as a heat casualty, and being able to see and move better in the woods. So I would choose winter, or probably the best time where it's not crazy, crazy cold, but it's also not densely vegetated. Maybe an April class starts to get a little warmer in April. And the downside to that is that you're not, most likely, depending on where you live, but in most cases, you're not heat acclimated. So if it happens to be a warm April, it can be a little bit rough, but you can definitely do some passive heat acclimation by going in the sauna. And that would help your performance regardless. Even if you're going in a winter class, doing some heat acclimation can also just enhance your overall performance, even if it's not hot when you have to perform. So those would be some considerations for winter class versus summer class. Of course, it can be done anytime. And if you have an opportunity to go, and even if it's not the most ideal time of the year, I would go. But if you have a little bit of say in when you go, or you can plan that out a little bit, maybe you have the luxury of kind of choosing when you attempt SFAS, then it might be a good idea to choose a winter or spring class. So best of luck with your 18 X-ray journey, and hopefully that answer gave you some good things to consider. Next question, how can smaller guys, in parentheses 5'5", make up for strength weaknesses, in parentheses lifting and rucking, or other disadvantages that involve height? So we'll talk lifting first. Smaller guys are usually not at a huge strength disadvantage, maybe an absolute strength disadvantage, but sometimes maybe not even that. So, if you're 5'5", 150 pounds, you're probably not going to be as strong as someone who's 6'3", 240 pounds and lifts a lot. But you're still going to be strong enough if you lift and you build strength, and you're definitely at an advantage with things like calisthenics. If you're 5'5", you have short arms, most likely, at least compared to people who are 6 feet and above. And so therefore your range of motion on pull-ups is going to be less. Your range of motion on push-ups is going to be less. There are a lot of shorter bodybuilders, like professional bodybuilders. It's rare to see a bodybuilder on stage that's more than 6 foot tall. Usually they're a little bit more compact just because there's less surface area on their body that muscle has to take up. So there are certainly exceptions. There are taller bodybuilders. I think Chris Bumstead's 6'1", but a lot of bodybuilders are 5'7", 5'8", 5'9", and they're obviously, bodybuilding's not a strength sport, but bodybuilders are usually pretty damn strong and they're very muscular. But there are plenty of power lifters as well that are shorter, and usually being shorter. Of course, this depends on your limb lengths and your genetics and your makeup, but usually shorter guys are really good at bench pressing. Usually they're really good at squatting. Sometimes, just depending on how they lift and, again, their anthropometry or their limb lengths, sometimes they're good at deadlifting. Especially a lot of shorter individuals will do the sumo deadlift over the conventional deadlift. Usually conventional deadlifters, the best in the world, are usually taller and lankier. They have really long arms. But either way, I don't think being short is a crazy disadvantage strength-wise. Rucking-wise, which is the other part that you asked about, yeah, you're going to be a little bit at a disadvantage in regards to especially ruck walking and covering a lot of ground when you're not going all out. I've seen some shorter guys who are absolute savages on timed rucks, and it's just because they have gotten their cadence so high. Basically, just like running, your pace is the result of cadence times stride length. So if you have a naturally shorter stride length, which usually if you're short, you do have a naturally shorter stride length, you can make up for that by a higher cadence, and you can go pretty damn fast. You can get out on a good clip, even if you're at a slight disadvantage when it comes to just ruck walking. If someone next to you is 6'4", they're going to be able to basically take one stride for your every 2 strides. So not saying that you need to double your cadence compared to that person, but you're just going to have a higher cadence to continue going fast. So there's no secret or there's no special hack for shorter guys to improve their rucking other than just to ruck and get better at it and continue to progress, really just like anybody else. There are also, on the obstacle course in particular, there are certain obstacles where being shorter is not advantageous, especially the big tall ladder. I think it's called Jacob's ladder. Some of the rungs, if you want to call them that, on the ladder are pretty well spaced out. And when you're shorter, you're going to have to do some slightly scarier things. You won't have to jump to grab it. They don't make them that far away, but you are going to have a little bit of a disadvantage, especially if you're not comfortable with heights. So just consider that. But at the same time, there are plenty of guys 5'5" and below who have been successful at selection and then have gone on to have great careers in SF. So just do the best you possibly can. Continue training. I will say, when you're short, you don't want to get this self-narrative in your head where you're short. And so therefore, you're just at this massive disadvantage for everything and everybody. Shorter guys, definitely certain things you're not going to be as naturally prepared for or naturally able to do as someone who's taller, but you can always be a really good dude. You can always be really good at land nav. You can always be a great leader. You can always be super fast. You can be great at calisthenics. You could be ninja when it comes to setting up team weak apparatuses and tying knots and coming up with ideas, or any combo of those things. And you absolutely can show up to selection, put on a great showing, and be successful. So best of luck to you, and keep putting in the work. Next question. Should I lose fat before starting a program or lose fat through a caloric deficit while in the program? would choosing to be in a calorie deficit be counterintuitive as performance would be impacted? So, of course, being in a calorie deficit is required to lose fat. There's no way of getting around that I am aware of, although some people do like to claim that there's a bunch of other things besides the law of thermodynamics that are at play, and there really isn't. So you have to be in a calorie deficit, but it also makes things easier when you're also training during that calorie deficit, primarily because if you just go in a calorie deficit and you don't train, you're going to lose fat for sure, but you're also going to lose muscle and you're going to lose strength. And you may end up just being a smaller version of yourself, like body weight and mass wise, but a very similar body composition. So if you weigh 150, you don't work out at all, you don't lift weights, and you lose 10 pounds, maybe you're 140, but you're the same exact body composition. Or sometimes people will lose more muscle than fat if they go too extreme with it. And now they'll be fatter, but smaller. And most people don't want that. So if you are looking to lose fat and maintain muscle and maintain strength and keep your metabolism as healthy as possible, you'll also want to lift weights during that calorie deficit. It's just going to make things a lot easier. A lot of people do make the mistake of trying to create their calorie deficit by training more and burning more calories. That would not be something I would consider doing for the most part. Yes, for short periods of time, like if you're about to go step on a bodybuilding stage or something along those lines, using some cardio to enhance your fat burning, especially if you're already eating very, very low calorie, can be a solid way to do it. But it should not be like this long-term thing. Like you shouldn't be just continuing to add cardio instead of just reducing your calories by a little bit. So I would suggest at least lifting weights 2, 3, maybe even 4 times per week in this calorie deficit. And that's going to help you maintain that muscle. Now, if your goal is to perform in other things like conditioning, you're trying to get better at running, you're trying to get better at rucking, maybe you're looking to do some sort of hybrid program, then your calorie deficit is going to have to be less drastic if you want to still perform really well. So that's another consideration. Like if you wanted to just get lean, I talked about this a little in my last episode, going into a pretty extreme deficit and ensuring your protein is high enough and maybe timing your carbs around training, maybe eating a little bit more on training days, a little bit less on non-training days would be a solid idea. But when you want to also perform and you don't want your calorie deficit to be a big limiter on your physical performance and your recovery and so on and so forth, then you want to be less drastic with it. In this case, I would recommend probably doing some calorie cycling, which I talked quite a bit about in my last episode. I also talk about that more in depth in my soft prep recovery guide, which is in the description. But I would highly suggest overall, to kind of go back to your question, if you're going to try and lose fat, you also want to be training because it's just going to help you maintain your strength, maintain your muscle, and maintain your metabolic health. And you're going to be a lot better off. You're going to have a much easier time doing it. Next question, what are some practical ways to ensure you can cope with the demands of food and sleep deprivation during SFAS? Training with optimal nutrition and recovery into performing without optimal conditions seems a little bit like casting 3 sheets into the wind, chancing that you're tough enough. Yeah, so this is all comes down to mental fortitude. That's literally the best option here. A lot of people will think that they should practice depriving themselves of sleep or practice depriving themselves of calories or just going way too hard in training just to see if they can hang on to it. And that is more detrimental than it is helpful. Although training consistently and long term will absolutely enhance your ability to express your mental fortitude, it'll kind of bolster that mental fortitude. Using your training as the only means of doing so is not a great idea because you're going to sacrifice physical adaptation and physical progress for potentially a little bit more mental fortitude built. So occasionally doing some crazy gut check workout, I've got a video on YouTube where I talk about some options for that. Can be a decent idea, but I would also consider trying to build your mental fortitude if you don't think you have enough, you don't think you can handle it, through other means. And I will link this video in the description. I've made a video on 22 different prompts you can ask yourself to build your mental toughness that don't require going and just destroying yourself in training or sleep depriving yourself or food depriving yourself like this question asks here. And that would be a much better decision than trying to do it in training. When you are prepping for something that physical performance is the number one attribute, it's the least negotiable attribute for success, you want to make sure that you are in the best possible conditions to perform on all of your training sessions. Training is different than testing. When you get there and the conditions are less optimal, you're sleep deprived, food deprived, stressed, fatigued. If you have trained really hard and really soundly and fueled all of your training and prepared for and recovered from all of your training in prep, you're going to have a lot higher ceiling from which to fall before you kind of dip below your baseline. And the dealing with the sleep and the food deprivation becomes 100% mental. It's not something that like you test out to see if you can handle it. It's just some people can, some people can't. And if you have enough mental fortitude to get through difficult situations, which again, you can use those prompts in that video that I'm going to link, you're going to be totally fine when this occurs. And everyone's going to be a little bit in a deficit. Everyone's going to be a little bit cranky, a little bit tired. But the guys who can continue to perform and the guys who prepared really well by creating really good conditions for training in preparation for it are the guys who do well. Regardless, even if you practice it and just see what happens, like what's that going to tell you? If you learn that you can't deal with sleep deprivation, is that going to be like, oh, okay, never mind. I won't go to SF. I won't go try this. I don't know. Probably not. It's not something that you really practice. You just get through with mental toughness, and it's really not all that bad. So long as you just don't give yourself this belief that like, oh, I'm not in perfect conditions to perform. I'm fucked. Just go and get through it. It's really that simple. It's not easy, but it's definitely simple. So that would be my best recommendation for you. Next question. Is soreness in the intended muscle indicative that the exercise selection is hitting the targeted muscle? Interesting question. And this is definitely nuanced. So being sore in a muscle that you worked, that you think you worked the day prior or 2 days prior, whatever it is a very, very good indicator that you actually use that muscle. Your muscle would not be sore if you did not at least put some stress on it the day prior or with whatever workout you did. So yes, it is a good sign that you are hitting the targeted muscle. Now, is it required to be sore to get a good workout? Or should you chase soreness in your workouts? Should you try and get sore in the muscles that you're using? Not necessarily. It's usually pretty accepted. Like if you train hard, you're going to be a little bit sore, but you shouldn't be so sore that it affects your life the next day, your general life. Like if you did a leg day yesterday and it's absolutely excruciating to sit down on the toilet, you went too hard, because too much soreness just indicates that you just overshot what you were trying to do. And your body is just in recovery and repair mode rather than recovery plus adapt mode. So you can definitely go way too hard in a session and get way too sore, and it can be detrimental. So this is definitely, going back to your question, a very good indicator that you hit that muscle and you stress that muscle and you're doing something right, but also don't think that it's required. Don't think that you need to be sore in order to assess that. And also there's definitely a point of diminishing returns. If you can like touch your muscle and kind of dig into it and feel soreness, I call this searching for soreness, then that's a pretty good level of soreness. But say if I did, chest yesterday and it's so sore that I can like barely move my upper body, then that's kind of an indication that you're going a little bit too hard. So, if you hit back squats and you are doing it for quads and your quads aren't really all that sore, does it always mean you're not hitting your quads? No, your quads are going to be used for that movement anyway. But say you also do, maybe the next week you do some hack squats with your knees way out over your toes and your quads are actually a little sore the day after, then maybe that's an indicator that the hack squat is a better option for you for quads at this time. So that would be my overview on soreness. Definitely not something to chase, but also a solid indicator that you're doing something right. Next question. How many hours per week do you spend exercising? Have you found an optimal amount for yourself when you're not training for an ultra? How much time do you dedicate to running versus lifting? Yeah, so as of now, I am training probably 10 to 11 hours per week. I just finished a 50-mile week of running, almost 50, 49.3 something, just under 50. And I am going to continue to crank that up just a little bit as I get a little bit closer to my ultra. I am currently about 3 months out, a little under 3 months out from it. And I would expect that mileage to get up into the mid 50s and then probably in the 60s in the last month or so before I actually run it. So that's going to be even more time. And I'm only lifting some weeks twice, some weeks 3 times. I have kind of a asynchronous split. I don't go off a 7-day week. I go off a 9-day split. So some weeks that ends up being twice, some weeks that ends up being 3 times. But I usually go to the gym for about 90 minutes. And sometimes I'll hit 2 workouts, sometimes 3. So that's another 3 to 4 hours total, 4.5 hours. So double-digit hours training per week is where I'm at right now. But do I expect to do that after the ultra? No, I'm probably going to dial it back a little bit and focus on some other things like being more present with my family, my wife, and also doing some new business things. Right now, I kind of have to divide my attention a little bit more equally between 3 things, and I have to kind of determine which one is the biggest focus at the same time. You can't just be like a 10 out of 10 in all areas of life at all times. We have limited time, we have limited resources, and I like to kind of go through different chapters or different phases where I put more focus into something, whether it's fitness, family, business, and then run that for a little while, and then maybe change my focus. Maybe number 1 is family, then business kind of takes a slight drop. Fitness kind of takes a slight drop or goes more into maintenance mode. I think that's kind of a realistic thing it's kind of the only realistic way for most people who want to achieve a lot of different things in many areas of life. You can't just be 100% focused on literally everything you're doing at all times. It's just, that's a pipe dream. So the whole balance thing, everyone's like, you got to find balance. Well, honestly, people who do big things, and I'm not saying I'm some sort of like crazy person that does a bunch of super impressive or out of this world accomplishments, but being balanced is not necessarily something to shoot for. If you shoot for balance, you're just going to be kind of subpar across the board. And that's, in my opinion, that's not the way I want to live. So I like to kind of rotate which things I give my most focus to and which things kind of dial back a little bit. And I make sure to rotate through each one as time goes on, just so I'm not giving something the shaft all the time. As for after my ultra, we'll see. I may get the bug and want to train for more races, or I may want to take a little bit of time off and maybe focus on making some muscle gains again. I haven't lost any, if maybe a tiny bit, but very little, if any, muscle during this prep, but I would expect to probably lose a little bit as I get closer and as I start lifting even less than I currently am right now. But I do kind of miss going to the gym 3, 4, 5 days a week and trying to really make the gains. So ultras in April, and then it goes right into the summer. I might try and get more jacked for the summertime, dial back the running a little bit. Usually, no matter what, I'll maintain like 20-ish miles per week, sometimes 25, even if I am just really heavily focused on making the gains in the gym. But that's kind of the plan. We'll see what happens. We'll see if I finish the race and like, when is the next one? I want to run another one. Or if I finish the race and like, I'm good for now, I will take a little bit of time off from the insane running and focus on some other things. So good question. And I definitely don't maintain double-digit hours per week training anymore. It's just a temporary thing to prep for the best I can possibly perform in this ultra. Next question, can weekly weighted step-ups and progressive zone 2 runs transform me into a rucking beast for SFAS? I hate rucking, but I'm 6'1", so genetically have long legs and stride. I can easily maintain 15-minute miles without training. So although you absolutely can, if you're naturally solid at rucking and you have a good running base and you're strong, so you do, weighted step-ups as well as other things in the gym for your legs, you can absolutely do that most of the time and go and put on a show for, say, 1 12-miler or some sort of time trial with a ruck on that you do one time and then you're done. Doing this in place of rucking, though, for SFAS or for any ruck-based event would not be the best idea, just because the adaptations you have to make, not just the aerobic adaptations, not just the overall kind of strength and muscular endurance adaptations that are required for rucking, but also the soft tissue and the connective tissue and the bone adaptations. If you don't subject yourself to that in training, once you get there, you have to ruck day after day after day, progressing in time, progressing in distance, progressing in load, and also progressing in fatigue. You're just going to be more and more fatigued as selection wears on. You most likely are not going to be well prepared for that. And because you didn't make those adaptations in training, it's going to be a big shock to your system. So even if next week you can go out just based on your current training, minimal rucking, and ruck run a 2 hour and 10-minute 12-mile, can you do that the day after? Can you do that the day after? Can you go and walk around in the woods with a ruck on the day after that? Or will you be completely destroyed after that 12-mile ruck? Most likely you'll be destroyed after that 12-mile ruck, or you'll at least not be able to go and perform again the next day. But If you ruck a couple times per week, at least once, I would say twice would probably be better. You will be able to adapt to that in training. You'll be able to better handle it when you actually get to selection. You have to do that day after day after day. So specificity, I talk about this ad nauseum, but specificity is key regardless of what you're training for. The best way to get better at it and the best way to be more durable and the best way to continue to perform at high levels at that thing day after day for several weeks in a row is to do that exact thing in training. Now, can you do step-ups and run also? For sure. I would also do some other leg exercises, hamstring curls, maybe a bilateral squat, just to build some strength. You can definitely do those things too, but I would also consider doing some more rucking as you get close to SFAS if you want to become a true rucking beast. There are no rucking beasts that I'm aware of in the world that don't ruck on a regular basis. And when I say rucking beast, I mean like a top 10% finisher. I don't mean like just doing enough to get by, like going and smashing. So that would be what I recommend, is definitely to kind of suck it up. The fact that you hate running, it's rucking. It's okay to do things sometimes that you don't enjoy. And in this case, it would be highly beneficial for you. Next question. What are some of the biggest issues soldiers have with land nav, and how can these issues be addressed? There are lots of different compounding variables that go into the reason that some soldiers are not good at land nav, but I would say the overarching one is that going out and doing land nav, there's a lot of things going on in your head. Dr. Walton calls this cognitive load. There's just so many things that could be going on in your mind at the same time. And when you're clouded, when your judgment and your decision making and your thought process is clouded with tons and tons of different things, it can be really hard to focus on what's right in front of you, the task at hand. And that would be one of the biggest tips that I'd have for anyone going to land nav, is try to focus just on the task at hand. And the task at hand, in most cases, if you're plotting a point, it's plotting your point. If it's plotting your route, plot your route. Once your route is plotted, you have a good idea of what you're about to do. The only thing you should be thinking about at that point is, how do I get to my first checkpoint? Even if your final point is 12 clicks away, it's going to require 12K of movement. Thinking about the end of that movement is totally unnecessary at this time. You should only be thinking of, how do I get to my next checkpoint? That next checkpoint may be 500 meters away, maybe 700 meters away. You get to that checkpoint, guess what? The next thing you're thinking about is getting to your next checkpoint. And every time you get to a checkpoint, you're going to build a little bit of confidence. You're going to be like, okay, I got to my last checkpoint. That means I can get to this one. You get to that one. Oh, sweet. I just found 2 checkpoints. I can get to the next one, and so on and so forth. And you kind of build that confidence. It's like a realistic way to build confidence. To be actually truly confident at something, you have to be competent with it. And the only way to become competent is to prove to yourself that you can actually do it by actually doing it over and over and over again. So that would be probably my biggest tip, and the biggest downfall with a lot of people is they just get way, way overwhelmed with too many different things at the same time. And they're thinking about too many different things at the same time. And also, by the way, they're hungry, they're stressed, they're tired, they're nervous, they might not make it. And they just become overloaded with thoughts, and it kind of just makes it so they don't focus on the most important task, which is what they need to do right this second. Another kind of factor in this is most people who are really good at land nav and very efficient at land nav, of course, you have to be fit, able to move. But beyond that, you also have to be able to look up and see the scenery around you, see the area around you. So no matter where you're at any given time, as long as you know where you're at, you're going to be able to look at your map, and then you're going to be able to look up and see the terrain as it's depicted on the map. It's not going to be perfectly exact in all scenarios because the maps out at Hoffman are a little bit old, but it's going to be pretty similar. It's not going to be drastically different. However, a lot of people will be just looking at their compass. They'll set an azimuth and they barely look up around. They have like no situational awareness. So they're just looking down at their compass, trying to follow this perfect straight line, whereas they could be looking at their map, looking at the area around them, using their compass to get a general direction or a general azimuth, and then kind of using the map and the terrain a little bit more to their advantage, as opposed to just using your compass. Yes, you absolutely can get to your points by dead reckoning or following perfect azimuths the entire time, but it's a whole lot easier when you don't have to do that. And there's levels to it. This is not going to be something that you just apply one day and you're going to be good to go. But over time, the more you do it, the more situationally aware you are, the more you're able to look at your map, look at the area around you, practice doing that, the better off you're going to be. And the faster you're going to be able to move, the more efficient you're going to be able to move. And the better you're going to be able to exactly know where you're at on the map at all times. So those would be kind of the two things that I would recommend focusing on the most. Of course, the best way to do that is to get reps and continue to build confidence and continue to prove to yourself that you are indeed capable of finding your points. But try and focus on the task at hand, try and be more situationally aware, and continue to practice, and you'll get better. So that would be my best recommendation for you. Next question, tips on ruck walking the sub 15-minute mile and faster in terms of maximizing walking technique, but avoiding shuffling to stay on pace. I've heard some say that you should try and take long steps and just step it out, while some say it should be shorter steps with a quick hip turnover, aka higher cadence. Yeah, so just like running, your ruck speed is going to be cadence times stride length. And the easier one of those two things to manipulate is your cadence. So the downside of trying to step too big is that you end up potentially overstriding. So your foot lands out in front of your midline, and that will result in many unfavorable things for your rucking pace. One, it's more impactful. So it's more stressful on your body. When you are basically putting your foot out front, you are putting on a little bit of a brake. It's almost like driving down the highway at 60 and you decide to also ride the brake a little bit. So it slows you down kind of needlessly. Additionally, because it's putting the brakes on, it's just going to make your effort higher, and it's also going to slow you down. So you're going to have to kind of overcome that stop in inertia, as opposed to if your cadence is lower and your legs, just like running, are landing below your midline, then you're going to not be putting that brake on, and it's going to be less impact, and it's also going to be more efficient. So if you could focus on one thing, regardless of your height, regardless of where you're at, it would be on increasing your cadence rather than increasing your stride length. Yes, you can definitely improve your hip extension, your hip flexion. You can practice more, and you might end up over time having a longer stride. And of course, if your cadences get growing and so is your stride length, then of course you're going to be going faster and faster. But a lot of people will try and manipulate their strides and their stride distance and their technique, and they'll put a ton of thought and effort and worry into getting this perfect rucking formula. And kind of like running, lots of different things work for a lot of different people, so long as the basic principles are met. Like you are landing underneath your baseline, you're not doing anything crazy with your upper body. Usually, the more you practice, the fitter you get, the better you get at it. You're going to be totally fine with your ruck speed. So I would continue to practice, maybe shoot to increase your cadence 1 or 2 steps per minute every time you go out and ruck until you get to like a reasonable level. But I think another mistake that people do make with cadence is they will hear of some cadence that's like perfect or optimal or ideal, and they'll figure out what their current cadence is, and they will try to, as quickly as possible, get to that optimal cadence, which everyone's cadence is going to be a little bit different. There's no perfect one for everyone. But when you try to make big, massive, drastic improvements, say your cadence is 150 right now and you want to get up to 170 on a ruck, and the next time you ruck, you get up to like 165, 15 steps per minute increase in cadence in one ruck, that can be problematic as well, because your body's just not used to that. You want to adapt to it slowly over time by increasing your cadence in small increments as you go. So that would be the main thing I focus on, and just continuing to get fitter and improve your aerobic ability, improve your rucking skill, improve how comfortable you are wearing a ruck. And over time, you're going to get faster and faster, and you will be set up for your best chance of success. Next question. I am finishing up a base build in which I have built my zone 2 running mileage up to 40 miles per week. I want to transition to the TTM 2 and 5 mile running program. Would adding additional mileage to the program for someone like myself who has experience with higher running volume be beneficial, or will that simply lead to diminishing returns? So if you're already up to 40 miles a week, the 2 and 5 mile program is not quite that high. And I would say there absolutely are cases where someone who's experienced with higher running volume can add more volume to the program. If you're going to add more volume to it, it would be easy running only. Especially the second phase of the 2 and 5 mile, there's quite a bit of faster running, and it's kind of close to what I would consider for most people close to the limit of how much fast running you should be doing throughout the week. But if you add a 30 to 45 minute easy run, if you add 5 to 10 minutes to your warm-ups and cool downs, or if you maybe add 10 to 20 to 30 minutes to some of the long runs, should be totally fine. Of course, just continue to be mindful and assess yourself and make sure that you're still making progress and you're not beating yourself up and you're not just running extra mileage just for the sake of it. But adding some easy running volume is probably going to be totally fine, especially when you're used to it. And you might see a little bit better progress if that's the case. Now, this is not saying that everyone should add volume to that program. I made the program based on the average person, the masses, and people are getting great results exactly how the program is laid out without adding or subtracting or changing anything. So keep that in mind. But at the same time, you might get slightly better results if you are used to running a lot and you decide to add a little bit of volume. All right, next question. We'll make this the last question. Hey, Kevin. Hey, I'm 9 months out from selection and recently finished a 15-pound cut to 15% body fat at 170 pounds and 5'9". My lifts are solid, 1332 mile, but I'm not sure what to do about body composition. I feel good, but I'm a smaller dude, lacking lean mass. However, I still feel like I have room to cut body fat and lose dead weight. Would it be worth trying to bulk or cut, or would I just be better off eating at maintenance and focusing on performance, perhaps recomping a little bit? Yeah, so 170 pounds at 5'9", I think you are maybe comparing yourself to a slightly hyperbolic or unrealistic goal or unrealistic body size. Like 15% body fat, 170 at 5'9" is not really what I would consider small. You're not like going to go step on a bodybuilding stage, or people aren't going to see you walk by and be like, damn, that dude's jacked. But I don't think you're all that small. For reference, I went to selection at 6'1". So what's that? 4 inches taller than you, at around the same body weight, maybe even less. I was probably about 168 pounds when I went to selection. So I was very, very skinny and small. I was leaner. I was probably 9% body fat or so, but still, like, I was not a big dude and I was not a super strong dude. And I was totally fine strength wise. There was not a single part of selection where I was like, man, I wish I had gained more strength, or I wish I had gained more muscle, or I wish I was bigger. Because, usually when you're smaller and skinnier, you can move a lot better. And as long as you practice and train the right things, carries, general body strength, and you have a ruck on a lot in your training, then you're going to probably be perfectly strong enough. So consider that. As for your question, you definitely could get a little bit leaner and probably benefit from it health-wise, maybe even performance-wise. But 15% body fat is, if you're actually indeed 15% body fat, some people do think they're 15 and they're really closer to 18, 19, whatever it is. But assuming you are, give or take, 15% body fat, getting a little leaner might not be a bad idea, but also staying around there and hanging out at maintenance, kind of like you said in your question, would also not be a bad idea. Oftentimes when people hang out at maintenance for a really long time, they end up recomping. Even though everyone says recomping is this pipe dream and it's not realistic, if you eat at maintenance for long enough and you train properly and you eat enough protein and you're indeed at maintenance, of course, you're not going to be perfectly at maintenance every single day. No one can eat like that, but give or take, when you're eating what you think is your maintenance, some days you might be in a slight deficit, some days you might be in a slight surplus. As long as you're eating enough protein and it is actually close to your maintenance, you're going to maintain your muscle, if not gain it. And also you might drop a little bit of body fat at the same time. And usually eating at maintenance is best for overall performance, training performance. So if you're trying to get better at, say, running, rucking, and you're also trying to get stronger at the same time, eating at maintenance is usually a good idea. Unless you're really, really small, then probably eating a surplus is a better option. But for you, I would absolutely spend a good amount of time at maintenance. And I kind of recommend this for most people, regardless of where you're at. Eating at maintenance for a while kind of gets your body used to, it confirms what actually is your maintenance. If you go online and use a calorie calculator or some other equation to determine your maintenance, it'll give you a good idea, a good ballpark. But the best way to confirm that, and what I would consider a great option for everyone once they learn that number, is to eat at maintenance for a while and actually confirm that they're there. Weigh yourself in the morning, track your calories and macros very diligently for 10 to 14 days minimum, and make sure that's actually your maintenance. Make adjustments up or down. If you gain weight, you're probably a little over maintenance. If you lose weight, you're a little under maintenance, and then kind of go from there. But it would be potentially beneficial to maintain that maintenance for quite a while, just to get your body used to being at that level. And like I said, maybe recomp a little bit and support your performance. So I would not really consider, in your case, trying to go into a bulk. Usually 15% body fat is like the highest body fat percentage that I recommend going into a bulk, an intentional bulk for. The leaner you are when you start a bulk, the more insulin sensitive you're going to be. And therefore, the more healthy your bulk is going to be. And therefore, the better your body's going to actually partition and use the nutrients you're giving it, macronutrients, micronutrients. And the more likely you are to do that bulk, of course, if you're eating a reasonable amount of calories above maintenance, not just going crazy, you're more likely to not get super fat on that bulk, but you're going to gain muscle. You're going to gain a little bit of fat, but it's going to be easier to cut at the end because you're just going to be more metabolically healthy. So if you do decide to go in a bulk, I would potentially get leaner first. I would consider hanging out at maintenance for maybe a month, maybe 2 months, maybe even longer. See what happens to your body composition, see how you're feeling, how you're looking, how you're performing. Then maybe if you're still around 15, which I would bet you'd probably be a little bit lower than 15 after a few months at maintenance. But even if you are still around 15, you could consider cutting down to say 12, 11, 10% body fat, maintaining that for a little bit, then going into bulk. It also does depend on your timeline. If you are trying to get ready for basic training or selection or whatever, you have 9 months. Okay, so you have 9 months. You have a good amount of time to experiment and kind of test these things out yourself. And that's a good thing. So if you are going to bulk or cut, I would recommend doing them a little bit early. So a perfect world, a perfect 9-month plan for you. Of course, there's some nuance to this and there's some exceptions, but right now I would consider for the next 2 months hanging out at maintenance. Then maybe after that, seeing where you're at, maybe doing a 2-month cut. So that takes you to 5 months out. For the last 5 months or so, eat at maintenance and just focus on performance. You might get down to like 12-ish, 13-ish% body fat, which is a really good place to be. And then if you eat at maintenance for 5 months straight going into selection, you're going to support your performance. You might make small adjustments in body composition, but honestly, doesn't matter if you're 11% versus 12% versus 13% when you go to selection. No, what matters is you perform, and what matters is you feel good. And so that's what I would kind of consider doing. I wouldn't go straight into a bulk or straight into a cut right now. Definitely hang out at maintenance for a bit and then kind of see what happens from there. So hopefully that makes sense. That is going to be it for today, guys. Thank you very much for tuning in. I will do another one of these episodes here in the near future because I definitely enjoy them and I have a lot more questions to go through and choose, but that is a pretty good start for today. So hope everyone has an awesome week, and until next time, Terminator out.